the faith of Abraham. Paul continues his argumentation to the Romans.
And it doesn't surprise me that Apostle Paul brings the patriarch Abraham in his letter in support of his earlier statement that justification is by faith alone. After all, Abraham was an authority for the Jews, and wherever he leads, they will follow. So where does he lead? That is the question in this lesson.
We're transitioning from the end of chapter 3, where Paul states that, do we then nullify the law by this faith? Not at all. Rather, we uphold the law. Into the beginning of chapter 4, where he starts looking at Abraham and says, Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. Great. So we are back into this circle. How does it work?
You either work and earn your salvation, which is a fair wage of your efforts, or, says Apostle Paul, you receive salvation and righteousness as a gift. This is simply paraphrase verse 4 and 5. Do you want to know what the scripture says regarding this dilemma? He asks the Romans, and he quotes Genesis 15:6. Abraham believed the Lord, and this was credited to him as righteousness. It wasn't his obedience or his works that justified Abraham before God. It was him believing the Lord, having faith in his promises. And by the way, Apostle Paul brings also and quotes David as a second case of a life lived by faith in verse 6 to 8.
Can we go to God and say, God, give me my price now. I did it. I did what you asked for, so pay me. Abraham couldn't. David definitely couldn't. What they did is to realize how much they needed God. Knowing what David did, his affair, his conspiracy in murder, can you relate to his words? Blessed are those whose transgressions are forgiven, whose sins are covered. Blessed is the one whose sin the Lord will never count against them.
Paul was sifting through the Old Testament with the intention to find an unquestionable correlation together with the teaching that he had, justification by faith. And what most people will see in the Old Testament was the illuminated presence of the law. However, the apostle sees the faith of Abraham credited to him as righteousness even before he was circumcised. In fact, the circumcision was given as a sign of him already being credited the righteousness. Paul was somehow saying, if you, Jews and Gentiles, you want to have the promises of God in your life, as it happened with Abraham, the way is by faith.
Simple and straight. Abraham wasn't even a Jew. He was from a pagan ancestry. His response to God, this was his faith, was counted as his righteousness, long before circumcision and any reference to the law. In fact, when we studied the Galatians, we saw that circumcision was given to remind him his dependence of God and not to try to get the promise through his own efforts. Remember Hagar?
So, do we then nullify the law with this faith? Not at all, says Romans 3:31. What we are trying to say is that the law does not and is not capable to give life. Even God's law, Galatians 3:21. The law, in fact, condemns us. It points out to our sin. It is not redeeming and it's not cleansing. God's grace does all of that. His gift in Jesus Christ saves us. Our acceptance of his righteousness justifies us. All the credit of the works goes to God. Don't set your mind in earning and working out your salvation. Wrong way, says Paul.
Great, then let's get rid of this law. No, let's protect the law. Make sure that you keep the law. Focus on it. There is a struggle between these two. The law is not going anywhere. It's not going away. This law demanded justice. It demanded the sacrifice of Jesus.
Jesus died on the cross as a testament of how valid the law was, unchangeable, unbreakable. What the law was really establishing was a ground of reality that sin really exists. Sin can be only eliminated by the law. If there is no law, there is no sin. But what Paul made it clear, though, is that the law is not also the remedy for that sin. God's grace is. He, God, holds the power. He has done already all the works through the mission and the life of Jesus Christ. Don't try to add anything from your own efforts. Your righteousness lies in your focus on God, not on you.
The lesson doesn't go to the end of chapter 4, but there Paul argued that Abraham, even though he knew that his body was as good as dead, that Sarah's womb was dead, he was persuaded that God had the power to do what he had promised. Our efforts and our works are as good as dead, but God has the power to make the difference.